Thanks for joining me again as we explore another great classic film. This is among my all-time favourite movies from my all-time favourite director. It's a fabulous looking film with some of the sharpest and most clever dialogue in the history of cinema. It is Double Indemnity from 1944. Based on the novel by James M. Cain, which in turn was based on the trial of Ruth Snyder, which Cain had followed while working as a New York journalist. In 1927, Snyder persuaded her boyfriend Judd Gray to kill her husband, Albert, after he had taken out a big insurance policy with the double indemnity clause. The murderers were quickly identified, arrested and convicted. The front page photo of Snyder's execution is considered the most famous news photo of the 1920s. Double Indemnity began making the rounds in Hollywood shortly after it was published in Liberty magazine in 1936. Cain had made a name for himself the year before with The Postman Always Rings Twice, and while various studios expressed their interest, none were willing to make a firm offer as they believed it was unfilmable under the newly established production code. Paramount executive Joseph Sistrom thought that the material was perfect for Wilder and bought the rights for $15,000, half to be paid to Cain on signing and the other half if the script was approved by the Hayes office. The studio submitted a film treatment written by Wilder and Charles Brackett, which was approved, but with objections about the way in which the body was disposed, the gas chamber scene, and the skimpiness of the towel worn by the female lead. After clearing this initial hurdle, Charles Brackett withdrew from the project as he was uncomfortable with the material. Wilder's first choice to replace Brackett was Cain, but he was working for another studio and was unavailable. Instead, Paramount managed to secure the services of Raymond Chandler, whose writing style was similar to Cain's. This collaboration was tumultuous, which Wilder enjoyed and Chandler hated. Wilder believed that conflict was a vital ingredient for the success of the project, saying that if two people think alike, it's like two men pulling on one end of a rope. During their 4 months together, Chandler had a long list of complaints about Wilder, including flaunting his womanising ability, speaking too fast, and wearing a baseball cap indoors. One day, Chandler failed to show up for work and threatened to resign unless Billy Wilder apologised for his behaviour. Wilder, knowing how much Chandler would improve the film's dialogue, surprised himself and many other people by apologising. The pair had intended to retain much of Cain's original dialogue, but Chandler soon realised that it would not translate well to the screen. It was only when he heard it read aloud by actors that Wilder was convinced. In an effort to bring realism to the script, Chandler visited various locations around Los Angeles and took large volumes of notes. The key scenes where Phyllis Dietrichson and Walter Neff discreetly meet to plan the murder was informed by the time Chandler spent around Jerry's Market on Melrose Avenue. Considerable changes were made to Cain's story. The ending was changed entirely, and the character Barton Keyes was changed from a fairly clueless co-worker into the murderer's mentor and the man who trips him up. The experience can't have been as bad as Chandler made out, as he agreed to appear in a cameo, glancing up from a magazine as Neff walks past outside Keyes' office. This is significant because, other than a snippet from a home movie, there is no other known footage of Chandler. Wilder didn't get on with Chandler either, irritated by his constant drinking. Wilder effectively exercised his demons about dealing with alcoholics with his next film, The Lost Weekend, in 1945. Having the two protagonists mortally wound each other was one of the key factors in gaining Hayes office approval for the script. The production code demanded that criminals pay on screen for their transgressions. In addition, Double Indemnity broke new cinematic ground on several fronts, one of these being it was the first time that a Hollywood film explicitly explored the means, motives and opportunity of committing a murder. It took skillful performers to bring nuance to these treacherous characters, and casting the roles of Walter Neff and Phyllis Dietrichson was a challenge for Wilder. Barbara Stanwyck, who at the time was the highest paid actress in Hollywood and the highest paid woman in America, was Wilder's first choice, but she was reluctant to take the part, fearing it would have an adverse effect on her career. Billy Wilder talked her into it, and she was very grateful that he did. Wilder had a much tougher time casting Neff. Dick Powell wanted the role, but he was under contract to a different studio who wouldn't allow it. Alan Ladd, Brian Donlevy, James Cagney, Spencer Tracy, Gregory Peck and Frederick March all passed on the role. Growing increasingly desperate, Wilder approached George Raft, calling it scraping the bottom of the barrel, and even Raft turned the part down. Fred McMurray's reputation at the time was for playing nice guys in light comedies, and Wilder had to persuade him to take on the role. McMurray didn't believe he was a good enough actor to take on that role, but Wilder petted him about it for every day, at home, in the studio, commissary, in the dressing room, on the sidewalk, until he simply wore Fred down. McMurray put in a brilliant performance and later said, "I never dreamed it would be the best picture I ever made." Edward G. Robinson's initial reluctance to sign largely stemmed from the fact that he wasn't keen on being demoted to the third lead. Eventually he realised that this was a transitional phase of his career, and he was happy to be getting paid the same as Stanwyck and McMurray for doing a lot less work. Wilder was widely criticised for the way he dressed Stanwyck, but Billy claimed to have dressed her in the badly fitting blonde wig and an anklet in an effort to make her look especially sleazy, phony and lacking in taste. And that is the way that Phyllis comes across. The film's ending was a problem. Kane originally had the character suicide, but that was unacceptable to the Hayes office. So Wilder wrote and filmed an ending in which Neff goes to the gas chamber while Keyes watches. This version was only seen by preview audiences and was cut because of their poor response and because Wilder felt that the earlier scene between Neff and Keyes was much stronger. This also removed the censor's final objection to the film. The gas chamber footage has been lost and only production stills of the scene survive. The look of the film was the work of cinematographer John Seitz, the #1 director of photography at Paramount. Wilder had worked with Seitz on Five Graves to Cairo and was happy with his willingness to experiment. Seitz gave the film the look of German Expressionism, with dramatic use of light and shadow. He contrasted the bright sunny Southern California exteriors shot on location with dark gloomy rotten interiors shot on sound stages. The contrast was heightened by dirtying up the sets, by overturning ashtrays to give the house a grubby look, and by blowing aluminium particles into the air to create the look of dust. Seitz also used Venetian blind lighting, which creates the illusion of prison bars trapping the characters. Double Indemnity is an important and some say the first film noir to be made, and the look of the film is a critical part of this. One of the film's best scenes was not in the original script, but was inspired by something that happened on set. After shooting the sequence where Phyllis and Walter make their getaway after dumping their victim's body on the tracks, Wilder was about to drive off for lunch when his car wouldn't start. Inspired, he reshot the scene, this time with Phyllis unable to start the car for an excruciatingly long time. Kane was impressed with the way that the film turned out, saying, "It's the only picture I ever saw made from my books that had things in it I wish I'd thought of. Wilder's ending was much better than my ending, and his device for letting the guy tell the story by taking out the office dictating machine, I would have done it if I had thought of it myself." Double Indemnity opened nationwide in July of 1944 and was an immediate hit, despite or perhaps because of a campaign by singer Kate Smith. She had implored the public to stay away on moral grounds. Howard Barnes at the New York Herald Tribune called Double Indemnity one of the most vital and arresting films of the year. Variety wrote that the film sets a new standard for screen treatment in this category. The LA Times movie critic Philip Scheuer ranked it with The Human Comedy, The Maltese Falcon and Citizen Kane as Hollywood trailblazers. Double Indemnity was nominated for 7 Oscars, including for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Screenplay and Best Black and White Cinematography, but didn't win any awards. Surprisingly, neither McMurray nor Robinson were even nominated. Double Indemnity was adapted as a 30-minute radio play twice for the Screen Guild Theatre in 1945 with Fred McMurray and Barbara Stanwyck, and then 5 years later with Stanwyck and Robert Taylor. It was adapted for the 1948 broadcast of the Ford Theatre with Burt Lancaster and Joan Bennett, and the 1950 broadcast of Lux Radio Theatre with McMurray and Stanwyck. In the early 70s, Paramount had plans for a remake with Robert Redford, but the project never got off the ground. It was remade as a television movie in 1973, and a 2003 Indian film named Jism was inspired by it. It is ranked amongst the 100 best movies of all time by the AFI, Time Out Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, the National Society of Film Critics, Time, the Writers Guild of America, and World Film Critics that were contacted by the BBC. It is one of the 1001 movies you must see before you die. It was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry in 1992 and is included on Roger Ebert's Great Movies list. So lots of really good reasons to watch this film. A brilliant story with some of the best movie dialogue you'll ever hear. Beautifully shot in black and white, again with some of the best photography you will see. Impeccable direction by Wilder and amazing performances by all of the cast. So what I suggest you do is that you go to our website, find our virtual screenings page, find the link to this particular film, click on it and watch it. I'm absolutely positive you'll love it, almost as much as I do. But as always, we'd ask you to come back, let other people know your thoughts about the film and whether you'd recommend it for them also. And then we'll be back in the not too distant future for our next classic films review. See you next time.